Hi everyone, Alexandra Jowett from Jupiter Returns here with a special extended version of my in-depth day-by-day weekly astrology forecast for the week of the 16th to the 22nd of March. And I hope this finds you all well and safe and healthy. No surprises for guessing what the main topic of conversation is going to be today. My aim here, I've broken down this, it is an extended, I'm going to be going on for a little bit longer than normal, broken it down into two halves really. The first part is going to be really looking at the background, the cycles, the planetary cycles that are involved here in precisely what's been going on behind the scenes, the timeline of events, if you like, just to really give us some grounding, you know, some context. This is all happening in the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn is our structure. It's our system, how we organize. It's an earth sign, so it's this tangible, material, solid kind of energy. And that's what I want to be able to bring to you is some context around all of what at this point in time might just seem craziness. Then in the second half, I will move on to the more immediate day-to-day, the usual kind of forecast that you're used to seeing, just taking it each day of the week and precisely what we might be able to expect in terms of astrological influences. So grab a cuppa, run a bath, do whatever it is that you do to focus in for the next hour or so as I try and kind of fill in some of the blanks of what's appearing in our lives right now. And thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new to my my site, my channel, please give me a subscribe. Also, in previous episodes, I'll try and put a link down later, but in a previous episode, I did go into quite some detail about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is a big part of this. Just looking at the current cycle that we're in, or have been in, so I'll link that one in as well. You may be interested in that too. So what we're going to do, what I thought I'd start with is there's so much going on in Capricorn. This is where everything's happening. So I thought we'll just take everything out. Okay, we'll just clear the decks and we'll start from scratch, essentially looking at each individual planet and point that's building up the part of what's going on. So that we can look at them in turn, give each one, understand each one a little bit more deeply, and therefore what each planet is bringing to the totality of what we find going on. So I'm going to start with the nodes. So we've got this the north node of the moon down there in Cancer, and we have the south node in Capricorn at this time. Now the lunar nodes are these points in the sky. It's not a physical body. So it's essentially where the apparent path of the sun, the ecliptic, crosses where the moon moves. And so the point in the middle where they cross is what creates the node. So when it's ascending, it's the north node, and the converse. These are essentially very fertile points. It's the meeting of the feminine moon energy, the yin energy, and the masculine solar yang energy that gives us this very fertile point. And these tend to be related to, because they are what create the eclipses, these tend to be related to fated, destined karmic events that play out. So each year, these guys are moving around the chart. They move through an axis, you know, a polarity of two different signs at a time for around about a year, 18 months. And that's where we find the eclipses. And this is the main sort of starting point for today. I'm going to take you back to Boxing Day. Okay, so December the 26th of 2019. And we had an eclipse in Capricorn. Okay, it was a new moon eclipse and it was taking place at 4 degrees. 4 degrees, remember that's an important number. 4 degrees of Capricorn. So what we had at the time was we had the moon and the sun conjunct together. That's what we have at a new moon. It's this fresh new start, a brand new beginning at 4 degrees of Capricorn. And it was actually conjunct the planet Jupiter. Okay, who we'll talk about a little bit later on. So there was a big Jupiterian element involved in this very fated karmic moment in time. And there was also a connection to Uranus down there in Taurus, which I will go on to talk about. So what did this do? Essentially, this was like a very potent, fated kind of start point. And this is actually where we had the first cases of coronavirus emerging in China. It was a very kind of background news event that I had my eye on at the time. It might come to nothing, it might come to something, we're not too sure. But yeah, we started to just hear the first bits of information about this new virus that was starting in the very, very early stages, the first 1 or 2 patients in China being affected. Uranus being the planet of change, so there was a strong connection, a trine aspect, an easy flow of energy between Uranus, the change bringer, the destabilizer. It's this radical, potent energy of new beginnings, doing things very, very differently than we've done them before. So that was very much involved in this whole setup. So we've got the nodes of the moon. That's the first thing to sort of set the scene. The nodes of the moon are still in those same signs. They're going to move round one axis. So they're going to be in Sagittarius and Gemini later on in the year, but they're still active. They're still creating this change in Capricorn and Cancer. South node being more related to release, okay, more related to bringing things to a close, because we've done that enough now. We've learned what we needed to learn from doing the Capricorn thing, okay? So now it's time to release that, move away from that, and try and engage more with where the North Node is in Cancer. So it's really a strong indication that what we need to do is move more towards the Cancerian essence, okay? The Cancerian influence of love, care, family, nurture, home, emotions, and moving more away from the Capricorn, which is, you know, Capricorn's right up there at the top of the chart. It's the 10th house, it's the zenith, essentially. So this relates to what's going on out there in the world, right? Who am I? What do I do for work? What's my career? What's my hustle? How do I provide? Yeah, how do I get to where I'm going? How do I achieve the things, the material things in life that I want to achieve, that I need to achieve? Whereas Cancer, this is the private world. This is the inner world. This is where we come home at the bottom of the chart. This is where we come home for rest and nourishment and care and love and gentleness and softness, where we don't have to do the hard work anymore. So this is kind of the background to what the nodes are bringing into the party. So yeah, currently at 4 degrees of those signs. So let's now look at Pluto. So Pluto, as you may know, is the ruler of Scorpio. Scorpio occupies the 8th house. Scorpio, Pluto, 8th house matters tend to be a death and rebirth. So this is where the part of our charts where things get quite intense, where things can be somewhat dark, because it's the part of the chart, and we are all made up of all 12 signs. We all have the circle. So we've all got Scorpio, Capricorn, everything somewhere in our chart. Okay, this isn't just Scorpio people. Scorpio is about the stuff that is to look at. Scorpio is the areas of life that we tend to brush under the carpet in polite company. It's death, it's sex, it's taboo, anything that's taboo, anything that's just, oh, we don't talk about that, you know, going to the loo, anything that's, you know, unpleasant, horror, you know, what Scorpio is happy in those areas. Scorpio is very comfortable in those areas of life. You know, Scorpio happens at the time of year, it's autumn. This is when we're going through the death cycle, the natural process of the leaves coming off the trees and decaying and rotting in order to provide the fertility for new life to come. Okay, so Scorpio is comfortable in that environment. It doesn't place this judgment on death and decay and rotting and all of that stuff and darkness, you know. It's Halloween. It's where we celebrate, in some cultures, they celebrate the dead. They allow that energy to connect them with members of their family that they care about that have passed over to the other side. There's a whole different approach to it. And through Scorpio, we can do that. We can get comfortable in the darkness because we have to. It's the beginning of winter, right? It's like, yeah, we kind of need to be okay about the darkness. So Scorpio is a fixed sign. And as a fixed sign, it doesn't like change. The fixed signs tend to want things to stay as they are. And yet, you know, the paradox is that Pluto, its ruler, the MO of Pluto is to bring change, right? Death and rebirth is change. So what happens is there's this suppression, okay? Suppression, the resistance to the change, against the change, and where they collide, it builds up and builds up and builds up into an explosion. So this is why we have the crisis is being represented by Pluto, because it's these opposing forces, these like tectonic plates coming together, and it creates a volcano, right? So Pluto, Scorpio, 8th house stuff relates to those major crises that we experience in our life. So the point of Pluto, because it's so far out into space, you know, it's right out there in the dark, it's furthest away from the sun, hence the darkness. It's moving around incredibly slowly. It takes 250 years to go all the way around the chart, which, you know, the sun does in 1 year. So it's very, very slow. So it's working on us, it's operating on us on a very deep level. All right, the deeper into space a planet is, the deeper within us it's working. And so we know that this is a very core level crisis. We know this is a very core level change that's trying to take place. And this is a change that transcends this particular incarnation. We're not all going to live 250 years. So Pluto speaks to our soul level transformation, the stuff that will carry through into future lifetimes and into previous lifetimes, and, you know, however you want to kind of look at that. So Pluto brings crisis. Now, if we go back, just to give a little bit of context of the kind of crisis that we've lived through in the past, just to show the effect. So when we had Pluto in its home sign of Scorpio, the big kind of global crisis at that time was we had the HIV/AIDS virus emerge onto the scene. Okay, so Scorpio sex. We don't like to talk about sex, you know, certainly not in Britain. And Pluto came along and said, you know what, everything's being hidden. Everything's being, you know, pushed away. Okay, the sexuality, the fact that people have sex with different non-mainstream different non-mainstream ways, in non-heterosexual relationships, shock. And, you know, there is this sexual aspect to being human. And if we don't face it, if we try and hide it and suppress it and make out that it's something taboo and wrong and bad, then there's going to come a crisis point. So we had the emergence of HIV and the AIDS epidemic, and this made us, it forced us to look at this shadow and really be able to become comfortable with this aspect of ourselves. And through doing so, and it's interesting that just this week, actually, they announced that the drugs to prevent it were just, I think, announced this week, going to be available on the NHS. So that just shows the progress that we've made. There's so much more ability now in our community for us to talk about sex, for us to talk about the fact that we don't all have, you know, heterosexual sex in a missionary position, you know, 2 times a week. We've become accepting of the fact that we are sexual beings, and it's not healthy to suppress that. And so in talking about it, in facing it, in bringing it out into the light, which the crisis forced us to do because we don't like doing that, It's made us more understanding. It's made us evolve beyond this kind of stuffy, rigid kind of way that we were before, to now being way more tolerant, being way more accepting and understanding, and deepening our own sexual experiences through doing so, which is a really important part of life, you know? So that was kind of like what Pluto created when it was moving through Scorpio. We then moved on and we had the years of Pluto in Sagittarius. Sagittarius being ruled by Jupiter. Sagittarius is all about the foreign. Okay, it's all about our philosophies, our personal philosophies and belief systems. So this is where we start to get religion and ideologies creeping in. And the crisis here was, of course, terrorism. And this upsurge in the crisis point essentially was, up until this point in our history, you know, we'd always fought an enemy that didn't want to die. Right, this is getting really super Pluto. And at this point, we suddenly were faced with people who would die for their beliefs, happy to die. You know, I'll be a martyr, that's great, that suits me. It actually adds, if I die, it's even better. Like, how do you deal with someone, a perceived enemy, when they're not even scared to die? All right, so this was all about ideology. This was the rise of the Taliban, the rise of ISIS, these very, very fundamentalist, extremist beliefs and religions. So, and we had a war situation because it was in sharp contrast to the kind of the beliefs and the philosophies of life of those in the West and Western culture. So we saw a rise in this kind of war. We had, you know, the shock and awe. I mean, that really sums up Pluto in Sagittarius, shock and awe, you know, with W. Bush invading Iraq around this time. Sagittarius is doing things on a grand scale. Okay, it's Jupiter, it's big, it doesn't do anything by half. And he was like, no, I'm not messing around with this. So we had this kind of this war on terror starting, and this new kind of emergence of terrorism as being part of our day-to-day lives almost, and having to deal with these incredibly profound and extreme ideologies. And then what do we do with that? And I think we're still in the process of kind of coming to terms with that. You know, we're just seeing essentially about now the fruits of Pluto in Scorpio's work. So it'll be a little way down the line till we see the fruits of the Pluto in Sagittarius work. But I think you can see there how this is going. So let me take you back then to 2008. This is the moment when Pluto entered Capricorn, all right? Capricorn being the area of life that relates to our work lives, the business life, you know, what we're doing out there, earning our money to buy our stuff. Essentially, it's the hustle. Capricorn is all about the system, the structure, and it's financial. It's all about materials, okay? And our current system is geared up for us to, you know, all the people are on the planet and all the stuff is on the planet. We just need a system to work out how we share all the stuff amongst all the people, all right? And the system, that's what's supposed to make that happen, all right? That's what's supposed to make this, give us security, right? Capricorn is about security and provision. It's the provider, it's the man, the guy, the person who goes out to work every day to provide for their family, all right? And it's patriarchal, hence my slip there into agenda. It's the patriarchy, because currently the current system of how we share our stuff among the people, how we keep people secure, has been male dominated. It's been hierarchical. So hence there's a boss at the top, okay, and he rules the show. This is Saturn in Capricorn. He's the boss at the top of the system, and the system, when it looks like this, when it looks like a triangle, it needs an awful lot of people at the bottom. All right, there's an awful lot of people that aren't earning an awful lot so that the guy at the top can earn loads. That's how it is. perhaps there's a little bit of my own personal take on it there. But Pluto enters Capricorn, and so what happens? We have the global economic financial crisis, the big recession, all right? We haven't really recovered from that point because, of course, Pluto is still in Capricorn. So this is going to be a big part of what we see play out. So 2008, we have the ingress of Pluto into Capricorn, and it's really saying this is the area of life now that has become the crisis point, okay? Our authority figures, our structure, it's time. This now, you've been pushing this under the carpet, pretending it away, and we're in a world where we're ruled by the likes of Donald Trump. Like, how much more crazy can it get? Okay, but we're not very good at dealing with our stuff. We have to be forced, and that's what Pluto is doing. So that's Pluto. So now let's have a look at Saturn, because Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn, all right? So very strongly placed in Capricorn, very comfortable, he's on home ground, and he can give quite a strong expression of himself there. Saturn is the boss, the authority figure. He's, so he can actually, in your own chart, he can represent your boss, he can represent your father. He can represent fear, okay? And of course, we're experiencing a lot of that. The more planets that we have in a Saturn-ruled sign, the more fear there is going to be. Saturn rules discipline. It rules hard work. It rules diligence. It rules showing up every day, no matter what, to get the job done. Okay, so that's the essence of Saturn, and we need that. We need to go out there and do our work every day and provide. So we need that aspect within us as human beings, just in order to thrive. We need to have some structure and discipline. We need to be able to take responsibility. That's what Saturn's all about. Taking responsibility, owning our stuff. Because if we don't, and we just want to have things easy and comfortable and pleasant and light all the time, we just wouldn't get anything done. Nothing would happen. There would be no structure, you know, because everyone would just be, well, you know, everything will be fine. So we have to have a little bit of the hard. We have to have a bit of the discipline. So Saturn moved into Capricorn on, this was December 2017. And if you think back to that winter that we had, Saturn representing cold and harsh energy, we actually had the beast from the east. We had this incredibly, extremely cold winter that we hadn't had here for many, many years. I mean, I live on the south coast, and, you know, walking along the beach and seeing snow piled up on top of beach huts is a pretty rare thing. This was an extraordinarily cold time, and that really ushered in the feeling of, oh, Saturn's here. Saturn's in his home sign. Okay, so we have also Saturn still in Capricorn as well at this time, a very important player in this at the moment. So we're building up now. You can start to see the picture of the type of energies that are showing up and in the area of life that they're showing up in. So sticking just for the moment with Saturn and Pluto, they have a cycle with each other over the years. Just like the sun and moon come together at times, so do faster and slower moving planets come together at times and create new cycles, just like the sun and moon do. And for those of you who've been watching me for a little while, you'll know that these guys came together then on January the 12th of this year to create a new cycle. January the 12th, this took place at 22 degrees of Capricorn. That's another important number for you to remember. 22 degrees of Capricorn, these guys came together. They come together roughly about every 34-ish years, depending on which signs they're in, because Pluto has an elliptical orbit. It's not circular, it's not a perfect circle. So it spends a shorter amount of time in some planets and a longer amount of time in others. It's not a perfect circle. So depending, it can change. But around about 34 years. And this is, I've done a previous video on this particular cycle, this 35-year cycle that we've just gone through, and I'll link that in at the end. But essentially, when Saturn and Pluto come together, we experience quite profound restructures, okay, where Pluto pulls things apart, it disintegrates things, and Saturn is all about putting them back together. So essentially, the death and rebirth cycle is involved with sort of the structure of how we organize those individual elements that make up the whole. So it's essentially associated with big changes in authorities, in structures, the New World Order, if you like. The last time that Saturn and Pluto came together in the sign of Capricorn was the Protestant Reformation. This was where the Catholic Church, the patriarchal structure that we lived by, was broken down, okay, and it was declared to, you know, not have the authority that it used to have. We went through this very, very radical transformation at those times in terms of our authority and power structures. That's what these guys are all about, authority and power, okay? Pluto being, having this kind of connotation of darkness and wrongdoing, it can also be where power and authority has been manipulated, where it's been used for wrong, where it's been used for ill, where it's corrupt. And, you know, we only need to look to the news last week when we have, you know, people like Harvey Weinstein who've absolutely abused their position of power in order to meet their own dark desires, okay? Jeffrey Epstein is another one. So we're seeing that coming to a close now as we're saying, do you know what? There's no room for that anymore in our system. This is something to really celebrate, okay? You can't get ahead in life through taking advantage of other people. And there'll be a lot more of this to come. I'm quite sure of that, where we really start to question if that is that the only way that we can get ahead in life? By doing the wrong things, by taking advantage, by manipulating, by, you know, using the dark side. It's wrong. So a lot of that going on, and perhaps at the time people were experiencing a different view of the church as really kind of having one rule for the people and maybe not for the individuals within it. So perhaps that was part of the same kind of situation with the Protestant Reformation. Just some ideas. So January the 12th, this is when, following on from the eclipse in December, this is where the virus now starts to really spread. So this is the Pluto crisis, okay, where it was HIV over here, we've now got coronavirus over here. And it's like, okay, this is kind of like the carrier of the change. All right, so it's not about the virus itself. It's just that the change that the virus is trying to create is coming in the form of the virus. Okay, so the change in attitudes that we needed to have towards sexuality and towards being able to talk about the taboo areas of life, that came through the virus of HIV. Completely, you know, completely not really about the virus itself, it's what the virus is doing underneath in the background. So January the 12th, Saturn and Pluto come together, and this starts hitting the news at this point, because this is when China starts to regularly report quite a big spread, and this is starting to catch people's attention, the authorities' attention. We start to see them putting in structures in place, rapidly building 2 hospitals. What could be more Pluto Saturn than rapidly building 2 new hospitals in order to deal with this crisis? All right. So that was the Saturnian kind of, how are we going to deal with this crisis? I know we're going to go really hard, really strict. We're going to really knock up these these buildings super fast. We're going to quarantine everything. We're going to, you know, suppress social movement. This is all the Saturnian influence, okay, in order to bring the safety and security and stability that people need through this crisis, right? That was the Chinese kind of approach at that time. So, okay, this now brings us to Jupiter, ruler of Sagittarius, considered to be a benefic planet. So kind of roughly associated with good things, although my regulars will know I don't tend to like ascribing goods and bads and positives and negatives to things. I think that's a little bit oversimplified. But essentially Jupiter is a warm energy. It's a generous energy. It's Father Christmas energy. It wants lots of abundance. Okay, so it wants lots of everything. Essentially, Jupiter expands everything. It's related to our beliefs and our philosophies. It's related to people who are in a position of having a lot of wealth. So royalty, you know, you'll have seen play out alongside this, the situation within the royal family, which is this very abundant patriarchal structure of kind of entitlement. I've been born into this family, therefore I can wear a crown on my head, and that gives me an entitlement to accumulate vast sums of wealth without having to actually do anything for it. Okay, so when we've seen with Prince Harry and Meghan this kind of like distancing, you know, the Saturn, like this isn't appropriate anymore in the modern day society. Is there really a role for the monarchy? Is there really a role for this kind of system anymore? And they've made their decision. You know, Prince Harry's made his decision and said, you know, this isn't what I believe in anymore. This doesn't suit my beliefs. So Jupiter is all around the beliefs. I'm just smelling smoke at the moment, which is a little bit disturbing. I'm just going to hope that it's coming from outside. And if I need to dash off, I will. So yeah, Jupiter, faith, beliefs, royalty, general expansion, general abundance. Okay, so this speaks to, when we're in this sign Capricorn here of material accomplishments in the world, this is really speaking to our you know, hoarding, our abundance, and the distribution of that. Is the system currently set up to ensure that everyone's needs are taken care of fairly and equitably? Or is it the case that actually there's certain sections of society that have hoarded a lot of wealth and abundance, and that just expands exponentially? You know, that's what Jupiter does. You know, like they say, money goes to money. Speculate to accumulate. You've got to have some money in order to make money. This is kind of a very Jupiterian principle. So abundance, growth. It also very much relates to long distance travel. So, you know, you can join up the dots there quite easily. Jupiter's involvement in this is really kind of asking us to look at how we move around in the system and how wealth is accumulated within the system as well. That's Benson. Hey, babe. So, okay, moving on from Jupiter. In fact, a little bit more information on Jupiter. Jupiter actually played a really important part of when Pluto moved into Capricorn. Remember, I was talking about that big global financial crisis. The reason it was global is because Jupiter, this is the last time that Jupiter was in the sign of Capricorn, all right? So Jupiter takes sort of roughly 12-ish years to move around the chart. And so we're going back now to the last time that Jupiter was in Capricorn, expanding the situation. So we had what started with the credit crunch, Saturn, Capricorn, restrictions, all right? Jupiter was the expansion, and I can talk with a little bit more background on this because at the time I wasn't an astrologer. Back then I was working in financial services at the time this all unfolded. And the role that I took was lending money to people. I was sort of in charge of making the decisions around where we lent money. And Jupiter, things were just going crazy. The bubble was getting bigger and bigger and bigger because we were just lending and lending and lending to people that it wasn't responsible. All right, Saturn, responsibility, doing the right thing. Okay, we weren't doing the banks. I say the banks were not doing the responsible thing. They were lending vast sums of money that were to people that really had little chance of being able to pay it back. Okay, it was all just getting too big and too much. And that's the downside of Jupiter's expansion and growth. We might think of that as a wonderful thing, but it's not so great if it's being done irresponsibly. So we had this credit crunch with Pluto moving in, the crisis. Oh my gosh, this has got to stop. Okay, the death to allow the rebirth. And with Jupiter, it was a global financial crisis, long distance travel. So here we are again, and we have Jupiter back in Capricorn again, with Pluto still there, still trying to do what Pluto set out to do when it moved into Capricorn. Okay, so we're coming to sort of another meeting point of these guys. So if we look back at the specific timing of that going on, although there was the run on the banks that we had in sort of the late summer of 2008, and then people started to become more conscious of the global economic crisis sort of the later part of 2008 and into early 2009. But actually, before there was the first run on the bank and the first government bailout, Saturn, Pluto, government bailout of the banks, the system, the financial institution, the patriarchy. Actually, one bank, Barclays, got a big sum of money, it's alleged, I think, from Qatar. Instead of going to the government, they kind of wanted to keep it hush-hush. They wanted to not create a panic, but they knew they needed to raise some serious funds. And so they went to private investors, it's believed, in order to do that. And that was in the May, and that was the time that Jupiter was last at 22 degrees of Capricorn, which is exactly where the Saturn-Pluto conjunction took place this year, and where there's lots more going to be unfolding this week. So that was the very, very start. That was when it went global, Jupiter. They went to the Middle East to raise their funds in order to deal with the crisis. So really interesting kind of cycle that I spotted just looking at the charts. The last time Jupiter was at this exact degree, 22 degrees of Capricorn, that was exactly what was going on. So interesting for me that I was actually in that industry, working in that was the final days of my time in that industry. And here I am as an astrologer kind of looking back on it and piecing together what it was all about. And that's the beauty of astrology. It's an amazing thing. So yeah, subprime mortgages, global recession, that was the whole Jupiter thing. Now, Jupiter will come back to this exact same degree, 22 degrees of Capricorn, Thursday night of this week. Okay, so that's just setting the tone for what we can expect as we move on later into the week. Okay, similar themes, I suspect. Or you could be forgiven for thinking that we could have similar themes. That's overnight ruled by the planet Jupiter, so it's even more profound. So now let's have a look at the last planet that's showing up in Capricorn at the moment, a much faster moving planet. This is Mars. Fiery, passionate, egoic Mars. He's our juice, he's the warrior. He rules the sign of Aries, and so he gives us our fight. And he is that lower survival, lower chakra, survival, fight and fornicate energy. All right, that's what Mars is all about. It's that masculine energy. It's the hunter-gatherer. I've got to go out there and kill things in order to feed my family, and I've got to create a family to feed. Essentially, that's what Mars is all about, that procreative instinct. As the ruler of Aries, it's Aries being the first sign of the zodiac, its duty is to self, okay? Me first is what Mars is all about. So Mars really kind of is quite egoic at times. It's like very impulsive, doesn't stop and think about anything. It's fast, it's hot, it's fire, right? Aries is a fire sign. So, you know, this is, I'm not going to stop and think, I'm just going to shoot from the hip, because, you know, you can't stand around and think about whether you're going to kill the tiger that's in front of you if you're trying to survive. You just need to be able to act on your instinct. And we all have that left in us. We all have Mars in us somewhere in our chart. So we all have a part of that instinct. And we're going to see more of that this week. We're going to see more of the survival instinct within people coming up. We're going to see a little bit more selfishness as people kind of move into that zone of, I have to protect me and mine, and that's my priority. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking about ways that we can harness this energy in different ways, as I always do as we move on. So, you know, I'm not saying this is how it has to be. I'm just saying this is, if we're unconscious, if we're not consciously engaged in the process of what's showing up right now, this is how it can play out. All right. So Mars, me, I am, I want. I'm gonna make that happen. Mars really wants to make something happen. It's a cardinal, fiery, passionate energy. So Mars is currently at 20 degrees of Capricorn, so closing in on the rest of the guys there. Mars is going to hit the 22nd degree on Thursday also, exact with Jupiter. So we've got a pairing of Mars and Jupiter. Remember what I was talking about earlier of Jupiter being expansion. So what could we potentially experience when Mars the warrior and Jupiter the expander come together? All right, Jupiter related to our beliefs and our philosophies and, you know, all the things that I've explained. So I've got some key words that I've written down here. Firstly is a phrase that I heard on something I was listening to last week, and I thought that's perfect. The phrase was, it takes 1 million micros to make a macro. So I often talk about the microcosm and the macrocosm. Microcosm being what's happening in here, in me, on an individual level, in my little inner world, you know, the bottom half of the chart, the private life. And then the macro is, you know, the entirety, the all, how we're all connected up here, out there in the world. What's going on out there in the world? Okay. And like the phrase goes, it takes 1 million micros to make a macro. We are all playing our part, our individual part in what's happening out there. And that's a really important message at this time. Okay. If 1 million people change something, one little thing, it does make a macro scale event. Okay, you know, we've talked about in the past about when people join together in group, how much more power there is. Those of you who practice something like group meditation, group yoga, anything like that, you will understand the increase in power when people join together and make an act, do something together. It's just increased, the power of that is increased so much more. So I think Mars and Jupiter's got a lot of that potentiality. So it's also, I'm calling it a truth bomb, you know, Jupiter, beliefs, faith, ideologies. It's very, very connected to truth. And personally, I don't I don't operate within the context of there being a single truth. We are all living our own truth all at the same time. However, there are some fundamental facts. You know, we can't escape that. It's a fundamental fact that I will die at some point in my life. This body will die anyway. So there's some inescapable facts. And I think this is a time when we really do have to, particularly with Mercury ending its retrograde, moving direct now, we really do have to start to get super discerning and question our own beliefs and ideologies and faiths. You know, so much of what I'm hearing right now is, this is just a scare story designed by the media because they want us to all be in fear. And I just think there's not an awful lot of sense in that. They want to sell papers for sure, although that's going down and down and down all the time. You know, they're not really making money from selling papers anymore. And I'm sort of skeptical of the view that there's a bunch of people sitting around going, hey, how can we like scare everyone today? You know, so I think when we do that kind of thing, there's a tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And what we need to be able to do is say, okay, let's take sources of information from a variety of different places with an open mind, okay, take it in, consider it, question it, discern it, pick it apart, and then make our decisions, rather than just having these very blanket kind of assumptions. And that's another Jupiter thing, you know, these very blanket assumptions. These very fundamentalist beliefs. Remember when Pluto was in Sag, we came upon the darker side of Sagittarius, these quite fundamental and extremist views. So we're also going to come into contact with a bit more of that kind of stuff showing up. So Jupiter rules learning as well. It rules higher. Sagittarius is the sign of higher education and philosophy. So hard or harsh lessons, I think that's a big part of what we have coming up. You know, Saturn, Capricorn, and the South Node, this is all about karma. Sorry to say, you know, we are generating karma on a micro and a macro level all the time. None of us is perfect. And so we are going to have some hard lessons, because where we failed to take responsibility, Saturn, Capricorn, for issues that are going on in the world in terms of our very evolution, our very survival, we're going to have some hard lessons around that. Exaggerated Jupiter survival instincts, Mars. We're going to see more of this. We're going to see potentially, I mean, we get this on Black Friday, where these people will literally tear each other's hair out in shops just to get that amazing thing. I mean, that's such an expression of Mars, Jupiter, and Capricorn, and the way that people will behave from this, almost like it's an existential threat. I have to get that TV, that PlayStation, whatever it is, you know. And we're going to see potentially things like that happening, where Mars is like, me, I'm the most important, and I will fight you for what I believe should be mine. So that could be difficult too. And Mars is the attacker. You know, it rules sharp things, it rules impulsive, painful things, very acute things. So this is weaponized opinions, weaponized judgments, weaponized beliefs, people's opinions, including my own, including exactly what I'm doing today. Although I would hope that I'm not doing it in a Marsy, weaponized kind of way. But we can find ourselves falling into that. No, you're wrong. Coronavirus is a hoax, or no, you're wrong. Coronavirus is this, and you know, this very kind of I'm right, you're wrong, because I know. Jupiter is a bit of a know-it-all. You know, Sagittarians tend to think, where we have Sagittarius in our charts, we're all Sagittarians to some extent or another, is where we can be a bit of a know-it-all. You know, the head can be a bit expanded, okay, with Jupiter, as it's filling full of knowledge and belief. It tends to think, well, if my head's so big, then it must be because I know everything. So when you add that into this kind of, this very primal egoic kind of stuff, then we're going to have that in full force potentially. So just check yourself. You know I've fallen into this trap recently. We don't know it all. And that's another thing about the whole virus in general. We don't know it all at all yet. This is a new virus. We don't know how this is going to play out. It could behave one way, it might behave another way. We just don't know. And it's way, way better to just hold that opinion at this time. And if you find yourself getting full of yourself, Jupiter, Mars, getting full of yourself, getting anger, that kind of thing, exercise, go out, move physically. Mars wants to make something happen. So if you give Mars what it wants, then it kind of tends to dissipate. So go and burn off some of that energy. Go for a run, you know, go and have a workout. This is why we do these things. It's like, because there's a lot of frustration. When Mars doesn't have an outlet, it's really frustrated energy. And you throw in Jupiter, which is just going to expand it. And it's, you know, it's kind of you know, it's just a huge buildup of tension. And I think that's really part of what's going on here, the buildup of tension. We can all feel it. And particularly this week, that's going to be super prominent. There's this idea, you know, that they should, and we've all done this to some extent over the recent times, is they should do something about that, you know. Like someone should do, like 1% of our population is living in a refugee camp. It's just not right. All these homeless people on the street, you know, why aren't the government doing something? And when Mars comes with Jupiter, it's a time to say, well, what about me? What can I do? It goes back to this million micros making a macro idea, you know, is, well, how do I show up in that system? Am I just kind of like waiting for someone else to do all the hard work, to take responsibility for this situation? You know, that's not my job. My job is just to kind of go to work and go on holiday a couple of times a year and, you know, whatever, exist. Perhaps this is a calling for us to consider our own part in the bigger picture and say, well, maybe it's time that, you know what, if the government, if the structure, if the authorities aren't doing the thing that should be done, maybe it's about time that we do that for ourselves. Let's just show them how it should be done. Let's lead by example, all right? I think that's a big part of it. The other thing about the, you know, the business as usual mantra, which is why Pluto, you know, we had this worldwide economic crisis. Nothing's really changed. We've flatlined. You know, we've had austerity because that was the answer to everything, you know. Pluto only has a couple more years left in Capricorn to finish off the job, as it were, that it came here to do. So things are intensifying now. And if we do things the way we've always done them, then we're always going to get the results that we've always got. So the business as usual mantra of, it's okay, we won't change, it'll all be fine again, we'll just stick with what we know, very Capricornian, Saturnian things. It's not going to cut it this time, I'm quite sure of that. The involvement of Uranus is really going to be disruptive. It's really going to say, no, we need change. And we all know what happens if we don't change our physical position on a regular basis. We get pressure sores. And I think this is what this is. Mars and Jupiter in Capricorn is just a big pressure sore that's building up. And it's saying, you know, something has to change here because this is pain. This is real pain on a personal level. We can ignore stuff when it's happening to someone else, but this is where shit gets personal this week. When Mars is involved, this is going to hurt you. This is going to hurt on an individual level. This is where the world, the macro, comes to the micro. It's like, this involves you now. This isn't just happening to someone else. And this is usually what it takes for human beings to make a radical change. You know, unfortunately, we are kind of selfish beings inherently. So acting with integrity is a really important key. Acting Mars with integrity, Saturn, from the higher self, Jupiter, being observant of yourself, being in the wise observer perspective of issues that are playing out, not getting caught up on an ego level in the fear and the drama that's playing out. You know, this is giving you some context of what's trying to come about. I've shown you that, you know, we've gone through this in the past and we'll get through this, but it does call for some change. And that change will only be good. It will only be for our improvement. That's the only reason these crises happen. It's all about the rebirth. So we have to just focus our efforts on that and not get too caught up in the drama. So another aspect of Jupiter-Mars is having our freedom cut. Mars is cutting. So yeah, cancelled travel plans, obviously tons of that going on. And having our abundance threatened. I've never lived through times where when you went to the supermarket, they said, you know, you can only buy this much. I've never lived in rationing times. You know, post-war times, we've had that. And actually that was another Saturn-Pluto time, the end of the war. We were in a situation of rationing. Jupiter is our accumulation, our abundance. And this is rationing. This is Mars saying, no, cut that in half because you don't actually need that much. So I'm just wondering, is the Jupiter-Mars thing that's this chapter essentially of the biggest story this week, is this really because we've become spoiled brats? Yeah, Jupiter-Mars, we've just got too many toys. We've become complacent. We've forgotten to be grateful for the smaller things. We just want more and more and more all the time. Like, I can't go for a week in Spain. I want to do a month around South America. You know, I want to go on the trip of a lifetime every year. You know, I don't just want a house. I want a mansion. I want 4 bedrooms. I want 2 cars. You know, I don't want the economy hummus. I want the luxury one with the olives on the top. And, you know, I'm just like, are we just a bit spoiled? I'm wondering if we just need bringing down a peg or two. The selfishness gone too far. Because, you know, if we're hoarding wealth in one area of the system, it's taking it from someone else. It's exploitation, fundamentally. You know, there's only so much stuff and only so many people. So it has to be divided in a more fair way. And that's what we're moving towards. So I think we're being taught to have greater respect for what we have. Saturn is all about respect and integrity. So actually, I think we're being taught lessons to really truly, for the first time in a long time, to really respect all that we have and how lucky we are compared to so many people on the planet, and just have some of those luxuries curtailed a little bit. So that brings me to the end of the kind of the preamble that I wanted to go through today. So I'll try and put a timestamp in here. You might want to take a break. And now I'm just going to walk us through day by day as I ordinarily do, just to give us the kind of the real detail. So Monday, where we are right now, we have the moon in Sagittarius, just completing the journey through Sagittarius. This gave us a bit of a lift over the weekend, moon in Sag. Moon probably just as I'm talking, going over the galactic center. So that's quite nice, that the womb of consciousness, the higher conscious. This evening, late afternoon, around about 5 o'clock in the UK time, the moon, however, will move into Capricorn and things take a more serious tone again. Capricorn is serious. Capricorn is business. It's like, okay, playtime's over. We're back in business here. So this is what our emotions are going to take a bit more of a serious turn with this vibe. We also have the ingress of Mercury back into Pisces. Okay, so you'll know if you've been watching, we've been going through the Mercury retrograde. So Mercury went retrograde at 12 degrees Pisces, went back to 28 degrees of Aquarius, is now moving direct and goes back into Pisces again. So just a reminder, Mercury retrograde isn't quite finished, it's still shadow. And also Mercury in Pisces, Mercury's thinking, it's information, it's communication. These things aren't clear in Pisces. Pisces is a bit chaotic, it's a bit out there, so just watch for that. The devil's in the detail. All right, so just be really, really clear. And just check things over and over again. overnight and into the overnight on Tuesday, in fact, and into the early hours of Wednesday, we will have a real super intensification. All right. So Monday, Tuesday is really preparing. Wednesday is when things start to get super lively. All right. So we're going to have an intensification of the mood because the moon will meet up with Mars first. So remember all those Mars key phrases I gave you in the first part, and just catch yourself, because this is the time in the day that it's really going to be showing up. So this intensification of anger, intensification of fight, intensification of separation, of selfishness, of putting the self first, our survival instincts, are very primal forces within us. Okay, so just watch out, try and stay in your Jupiter, all right? Stay in the wise observer perspective if you can. Then mid-morning, the moon will conjunct with Jupiter, okay? So more of that, more of more. Then Pluto in the afternoon, really getting into the nuts and bolts of the deepening of the crisis at this point. And then Saturn later on in the evening. Saturn now at the very final degree of Capricorn gives it so much more weight. The last degree of any sign is a really potent expression of what it's trying to do. And Saturn's going to be there until, I think it's the 21st of March. So it's hanging out there for a long time. Very karmic, super karmic. So that's going to be an incredibly intense day on Wednesday. The moon overnight then moves into Aquarius in the early hours of Thursday morning. Normally that would lighten things up a little bit, because the moon, our emotions can take on a sense of being a little more detached in Aquarius. A little bit more objective, a little bit less kind of sensitive. But this Thursday is Jupiter's day, as I mentioned earlier, and this is the day when Jupiter reaches that key 22nd degree of Capricorn. The node's now at 4 degrees of Capricorn, where that eclipse took place on Boxing Day. So really powerful now. We've also got on Thursday the Sun at the last degree of Pisces. So we've got Saturn at the anaretic degree of Capricorn, Earth, and we've got the Sun at the anaretic degree of Pisces, water. And I've written at length in the past about when we combine water and earth, we're really molding something, we get clay. So we're molding something, we're shaping something very powerfully at this time. And you know, Pisces is the last degree of the zodiac. So the last degree of the last sign of the zodiac. This is where everything finishes. This is the end point of the horoscope. All right. So this is the start finish line between Pisces, Aries. So the sun being here is very potent indeed. Overnight then and into Friday, we have the vernal equinox, 4 a.m. So this is where the sun moves out of Pisces and it's officially spring. It's the start of the whole new year, the whole new zodiacal year, the whole new astrological year. When the sun moves into the first sign of Aries, we're starting again. So there's that energy of great potency. The very first degree of Aries is called the Aries point. And it's said to be a very key point in terms of what happens out there in the world, but more so it's the actions of the individual. So actions of the individual can have a much more profound effect on the collective at this point in time. So I think that's a really powerful message to take from this, you know, Thursday night and into Friday morning, that the effects, the actions that we take as individuals can have a really big effect on how things play out. So that might be a time when people want to come together and to try to do something about it, to try and take some personal responsibility and get involved in the situation. Try and take some power back. Essentially, you know, have we given so much power over to the wrong people that perhaps we should just keep for ourselves and just say, do you know what, we're going to deal with this. We're going to ensure that the structure is fairer for everybody going forward. That's certainly what I believe. So the vernal equinox happens at the same time as Mars and Jupiter both come together now at the 22nd degree of Capricorn. Massive. It just couldn't be any bigger, frankly. We have then the moon moving through Aquarius will then create a square aspect to Venus. Venus is money, all right? Venus is relationships. Venus is the resources of life in Taurus. She's in our home sign of Taurus. Taurus is very much about the survival needs, the survival resources that we all have, food and money, essentially. So with this hard aspect, we could see greater issues showing up at that time around money, with Uranus in Taurus stimulating sort of changes and volatility in the market. This again, obviously, because of what's going on anyway, we could say this could be another flashpoint in that situation. But it did tune me into just looking at Venus in terms of the bigger picture and just trying to understand her cycles and where her involvement is. In the not too distant future, Venus is going to go into retrograde, just as we've had Mercury retrograde. Venus will go into, she's going to start the process as early as April the 9th is when she goes into shadow. That's going to be in the sign of Gemini. Interestingly, you know, when we have a Venus retrograde, the point is that we have a change of heart, all right? We have a rethink of our values and what we think is worth something. So it's a really important time, I think, when we've come through this crisis, or we're in the heart of how this crisis has shown up, to really revalue what it is that means something to us. This is actually taking place in Gemini. That's going to be taking place over the North Node of Donald Trump. Both he and Boris Johnson are both Geminis with several planets in Gemini. It's more active in Donald Trump's chart than Boris Johnson's, but I just thought that was interesting to note. And it's also interesting, very interesting to me. I hadn't heard any other astrologer mention this up until now, so it might just be something that I've worked out. But looking at the charts this morning, the next time Venus goes retrograde after this situation is going to be, bingo, over there, and these exact same degrees of Capricorn. That's going to be in December 2021. So if we're looking for, I know people ask me this all the time, when's this all going to be over? And I don't like that question, because that's the wishing things away instead of engaging with them. And I think we're all being called to do our duty and get involved in this situation in terms of what's playing out in the bigger picture and how we can reorganize. This is our opportunity. You know, in Chinese, the word crisis is also opportunity, and that's definitely the way I'm looking at it. This is our opportunity to say, this doesn't work. Let's break it down. It's breaking down, let's face it. What comes next? What can we do better? How can we bring more love and care to this? And blow me if we don't have a Venus retrograde taking place over these exact degrees in 2021, just as Pluto's nearing the end of Capricorn. Saturn will, of course, move into Aquarius and start a new cycle with Jupiter. That's very much later this year, in December this year. I think that's when we'll start structure taking place. And in the sign of Aquarius, this is more about equality. This is more about fairness. It's more about everyone being important rather than it being a hierarchy. It's a circle. Okay, everyone's equal, everyone contributes, everyone has something of worth and value. It's not just about who has the biggest car and the biggest house. So yeah, really just bringing you into that Venus thing with the moon squaring Venus on Friday. Venus doing that retrograde there is, wow, it really knocked my socks off to see that that's what's going to be happening. Saturday then, the moon moves into Pisces. You'll notice she's getting closer to the sun because, of course, we're moving forward into the new moon of Aries, which will be in next week's forecast. So this is the real time of endings and closure. You know, she's waning. This is the deepest part of the release point in her cycle, as she's really wrapping things up. She's wrapping things up in the last sign of the zodiac as well. So this is, you know, a time when we will be more sensitive emotionally. The moon in Pisces has that effect. It's going to be a time of going within, of being with self, of connecting to source, and really kind of working out what do I need to let go of on a personal level, because we have a very powerful new moon coming up the following week, a very personal new moon. This is Aries, it's all about me. So what are you making room for this weekend as the moon wanes and releases what's no longer needed from your life? Pretty intense. Thank you for bearing with me. If you've made it right through to the end, well done and thank you. And please share your comments and likes and loves and shares. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's helped to give some context around all the crazy, because there's no escaping it. This is the thing. This is pulling us all in on an individual level right now. And so the best thing to do is to be informed, to come from a place of wisdom and knowledge and understanding that fundamentally this is all about something good. This isn't just a crazy suffering experience for the sake of it. It's never that. And next week we have some gorgeous energy. You will be so pleased to hear, I'm sure. We've got some gorgeous energy with Venus in her home sign of Taurus doing some beautiful stuff. And I'm really looking forward to coming back to you then and cheering everyone up a little bit, and helping us to tap into that. So please tune in then. Bit of a teaser with that one. So let me just leave you with this thought. All right. Mars is fire. It's iron. It's literally the metal iron. That's why it's the red planet. If there was ever a greater expression of Mars in Capricorn, it's the ironmonger. Yeah, the blacksmith at his forge. And this is what's happening at the moment. We are forging a new future. We're beating it out. Yeah, it's in the fire. It's hot and it's hard and it's sweaty and it's dirty and it's ugly and it's horrible. But we are forging a new future. We're forging a new structure and we're forging new beliefs. Okay, our beliefs are being tested. Jupiter in this situation is testing the beliefs that we've placed in our structure, the beliefs that we've placed in our authorities, and we're deciding, is that really what we want to have going forwards? So bear with this hard, sweaty, dirty, difficult process. We are forging something beautiful. I'm quite sure of it. And the more people that can get on board with this message, the better. So please, support me, subscribe to my channel, but please share this. Please get the word out to as many people as you can. The key takeaway is going to be self, that's Mars, and consciousness, Jupiter. Self-consciousness, and I don't mean that in the way that, you know, we have to be, shameful. You know, we don't need to think of ourselves as being something wrong or bad or insufficient. What I mean is just having greater awareness, greater consciousness, Jupiter, around ourselves and what part we play in it all, because we do, like it or not, we all play our part. What part have we played in what's come before? Where are we now? And where are we going as we move into the future? What part do you want to play? How are you going to show up when the sun hits that Aries point on Thursday night? How are you going to show up and help to create, help to forge this future? That's all I have for you. I really hope it was useful. Much love. Stay well, stay healthy, stay happy, stay in the observer position, and much love. And I will see you next week. Bye.